with the deadline of the 29th of March looming very large on the horizon. There is an assumption in Westminster that we can get very close to the wire and then demand an extension to Article 50. This is a dangerous assumption. The longer we wait to ask for an extension, the weaker the negotiating position of the government. The closer we get to the 29th of March, the greater the concessions other EU member states will seek from the UK in return for securing their agreement. And the nearer we are to the European elections, the more difficult it will be to reconcile anything more than a short extension with the arrangements to reshape that Parliament to reflect Brexit. So we need to ask for an extension to Article 50 now, something that last night the EU indicated it would consider positively. The UK government need to face the fact that threats and ultimatums will not somehow lead the EU to compliant submission. Because while I'm sure that no one in the EU wants the UK to crash out with no deal, can we blame our European partners if they're exasperated beyond measure by what they have seen in the last few weeks? And whilst Brexit is surely the dominant issue in British politics, we delude ourselves if we think that Brexit is the main focus in France, in Germany, in Spain, in Portugal. Any other mature democracy, faced by a challenge of the sort posed by Brexit, would have seen a government seeking to build a broad-based consensus about how to move forward in admittedly difficult circumstances. But the government of the United Kingdom manifestly failed to reach out. Rather, it embarked on a narrow, partisan strategy to unite the Conservative Party, not the country. A strategy based on red lines, self-imposed deadlines, and on an inability to listen to or respect the legitimate interests of the other party in the negotiation, the EU27. A strategy which has failed to do anything to bridge the deep divisions in our society. Even so, the historic defeat on the withdrawal agreement and political declaration would have, in any normal times, resulted in the resignation of the Prime Minister and an immediate change in direction. But following that defeat, we heard encouraging words from the Prime Minister about cross-party discussions, reaching out to devolved administrations and looking to build consensus. It sounded like the Prime Minister had finally learned from the UK government's mistakes. When the First Minister met the Prime Minister last week, he was clear that the UK government was at a crossroads. The Prime Minister could continue in the direction in which he has slowly moved since the Lancaster House red lines, by now embracing a customs union and participation in the single market across the whole economy, or she could stick to her deal and doggedly try to continue on a journey which had already taken her down a cul-de-sac. So, despite those encouraging words following her defeat 2 weeks ago, it's now quite clear that the Prime Minister is going round in circles in her cul-de-sac, reiterating red line positions, failing to see the urgent need to extend Article 50, and failing to rule out no deal. In short, a continuation on the road to nowhere. Can anything be more ludicrous than the Prime Minister imposing a 3-line whip on her own MPs to get them to instruct her to go away and do something she only 2 weeks ago said was impossible? Rather than looking to unite Parliament on a way ahead, consistent with a vision for a post-Brexit relationship with the EU that continues to be endorsed by the National Assembly, the Prime Minister has chosen to double down on the backstop, even though the EU has maintained and repeated again last night that the backstop is not open for renegotiation while her red lines remain in place. And so can I say that we support the legitimate concerns being expressed by our neighbours in the Republic of Ireland and the European Union on the risks that Brexit poses to the peace and prosperity the Good Friday Agreement has brought to the island of Ireland. The Prime Minister is about to demand that Ireland and the other EU27 reopen a deal she has so recently said was final, done, the only deal on the table. If they refuse to give up the cast iron guarantee, can we blame them that they would refuse to do that in return for the UK's assertion that they can be trusted to honour their agreements? So, while with Brexit it's always impossible to be certain of the future, the Prime Minister's next dash to Brussels looks pretty much doomed. And even if she does return with some token concessions or reassurances, who can be sure that it will assuage that handful of deluded Brexiteers who genuinely believe that crashing out with no deal will just be a minor inconvenience? Let's be clear. the Prime Minister is going to need to secure lasting support for her approach to Brexit. Trying to build a strategy on side deals with the DUP and concessions to the European Reform Group will only weaken the government's position domestically as they try to pass the necessary legislation in the coming weeks. So we condemn the UK government for failing to see the need to establish common ground across political parties on Brexit for the long term. By contrast to the strategy of divide and rule seen in Westminster, right from the start, the Welsh Government has looked to build consensus, typified by our white paper Securing Wales's Future, agreed jointly with Plaid Cymru. In that white paper, we were clear about the trade-offs that would be needed if we were to honour the results of the referendum. We recognised that people had not voted to make themselves poorer and that Wales could not afford the massive economic costs of severing access to the single market and being outside a customs union. And that this meant we would have to accept a future where, like Norway, we had less control over our regulatory environment than we do as a member state. Our evidence-based approach continues to result in this National Assembly being able to agree majority positions to reject the UK government's deal and set out the form of Brexit, with participation in the single market and a customs union that would command our support. Agreement on the need to extend the Article 50 process, and agreement to rule out the prospect of the UK leaving without a deal. Our ability here to find common ground puts us in a position in this Assembly of strength when we seek to influence the UK government by being clear what is and what is not acceptable for Wales. Last night, the House of Commons failed to back any coherent way forward, except a worrying attempt to kick the can down the road. It seems increasingly clear that the choice the country may indeed end up being faced with is no deal, a bad deal which cannot command a stable majority in Parliament, or putting the decision back to the people. Another public vote is not an easy path. There are many obstacles on the route, both principled and practical. But while we as a Welsh Government will continue to urge Parliament to unite around a withdrawal agreement and a rewritten political declaration that reflects a more credible, more stable Norway Plus type Brexit, which, by the way, renders the backstop redundant, we also know that time is running out, and so the work must now begin of preparing for a public vote.